Okay, in this video, I'll be talking about the notion of discriminating data and thinking a little bit about broader notions of automating inequality. And I'm pointing towards some kind of key canonical texts here that have been written over the past decade that have provided the kind of foundation of understanding what the kind of social consequences of our new kind of data-dominated lives are. So, um, there is a kind of huge corpus of social scientific work, I think, now that consistently shows how the kind of algorithmic AI kind of data assemblage uh, kind of makes and reinforces traditional inequalities. It doesn't mean that they end up being the same, and as Tao Phan's work we'll look at in the course shows it both reinforces and transforms inequalities, and in her work in particular, racialization. Um, but essentially, data in, data out means that the machines tend to be built on data that is already kind of classist and racist and sexist, and therefore it kind of reproduces those things. Now, I'm being oversimplistic there, but like the politics of it is essentially that's how it's working in many different industries and institutions. Importantly, again, they work as kind of a black box thing. No one really knows how accurate they are. Even people building them will admit they're not sure how they work and not sure of the accuracy of results or whatever. Really, all that matters is the people that are kind of asking the tools to be designed in a certain way for a certain output or a certain need are happy with the results. The justice, the inequity, it doesn't really matter. It's just, whether they're getting the results in the end. So Eubanks's book in particular shows a litany of these kind of problems, the way people are kind of sacked or excluded, the way people are kind of policed, or the military uses these things as well, discriminate against, but even like, injured or killed because of these systems. This is especially problematic in the terms of way that algorithms and data is used in policing and warfare. Essentially, um, algorithms are increasingly deciding who gets to live and die. This kind of dehumanizes that, allows kind of these processes to kill people easier because sometimes humans in the system stop it. But really, broadly, these kind of systems are kind of writ large over our lives now. Um, Importantly, as I'll kind of talk about in a minute, it's not just necessarily the discriminated against that are on the receiving end of these things anymore. They're increasingly encroaching into the relatively privileged lives as well. But certainly, people that are already experiencing marginalization and discrimination are experiencing these things at the pointy end and much more intensely in terms of negative and pernicious ways than, relatively privileged white people. So another prominent book here is what I think is a kind of nice pithy way of thinking about these things of kind of weapons of math destruction. And O'Neill's book in particular has a kind of vast array of examples of how this kind of stuff works, how big data increases and intensifies inequalities and threatens democracy is the kind of tagline of the book. A particular example that I get bugged by is like the way that kind of teachers in the US are increasingly under these kind of automated ranking systems. And they're increasingly coming into middle class professions as well. And it kind of threatens people's jobs, and they're often deeply unfair. So the example she kind of sketches out in the first chapter of this book shows that how, like, kind of quite effective teachers, often loved by the students and parents and, highly rated by principals, are increasingly forced to be sacked if their students don't kind of reach various levels, whatever is decided what the level is, for standardized tests. Um, these kind of ranking systems and the kind of who gets sacked or not is just black and white, no institutional context, the complete ignorance of, the sociology of education that shows that like there's all kinds of deep inequalities involved in systems and how different classes and races and genders are discriminated against or struggle in various educational institutional situations. Um, so teachers are just sent automated scores, no information of like how or why or what they mean, no real information about how the ranking was established. And then school principals in these kind of systems have no choice but to send the teacher packing, even if the principal thinks they're good at the job. Really good example of automated inequality, really good example of the dehumanization of social systems, and a really good example of how like these things are often not fit for purpose. No one benefits from this system. It just means that in some of these places there's an increased shortage of teachers and good teachers. It means for the individual teachers, they may, if they want to continue in that career, move state and find a job somewhere else. And certainly for the kids, who are often probably doing quite well in that institutional context, it's certainly not good for them as well. So procedures such as this not only automate inequality, but if you think more broadly, they allow treatments of humans, the way humans treat each other, to become like, it makes it easier to treat each other badly. You know, people, that have to kind of make decisions about other people in powerful positions often don't want to like, wreck their lives or exclude them or cut them off. Um, Whether that's an insurance or whether that's a Centrelink or whatever, there's a kind of awkwardness in that. And what that kind of human connection means is often the person in power will bend the rules a little bit to kind of help that person if they see they're deserving or they think they're being treated unfairly. What happens in this system is that kind of humanness disappears. So the inequality is not only automated, it's dehumanized. What I find interesting about this is that I think for the most part, up until the last few years, is that relatively privileged people haven't really cared too much about this because it hasn't affected them too much. I think also that relatively privileged people have just kind of thought that maybe these kind of automated systems are keeping me safer, if like, scary people are being policed more or like, things like that. And the kind of people that, may not think of themselves as racist or may not think of themselves as being kind of having negative attitudes to people lower than the system, social system than them, probably don't think too much about the implications of what this has been doing to people that are already discriminated and marginalised against. But what's happening now is these things are moving up the class system. Now relatively well-educated white teachers are being affected by it. Um, Increasingly, say in the rental market, these kind of ordinal systems are being used to decide who gets a rental or not. And in a place like Australia, where it's harder and harder to buy a house, and it's even harder and harder and more expensive to get a rental, now relatively well-paid um, and professional people are experiencing these systems and are at the pointy end of them, and complaining about it. Job applications as well are increasingly being sorted, and this is particularly in white collar work where there's lots of well-educated people applying for the same jobs, to the point now where there's a whole industry like trying to help people like write job applications that the AI will pick up in a more positive way. So there's like this could be seen as a new form of cultural capital, but again, it means the politics of this has been experienced now by relatively privileged people, and that's why you're kind of probably hearing more noise about it in the public media. These systems have been working for decades for people that are, disadvantaged and discriminated against, but it's like happening more and more now. So there's an increasingly public politics about this kind of stuff. And facial recognition is a good example of how these things are used. Again, a relatively benign thing of like, detecting faces or whatever, increasingly being fed into various kind of data machines and algorithms and AI systems for analysis for different purposes. And Duncan McDouey-Rah and colleagues' paper here is a really good example of this, where they did some work about this on facial recognition around caste and power in India. So the recognition of these things add to various databases. You're categorized in various ways that was talked about earlier in the course. It's increasingly used in many significant ways, kind of more benign things like unlocking your phone or whatever. Again, your image is often kind of fed into databases there. To more, negative and violent means of kind of policing and profiling. Again, as much research shows in this field, something like racialization is intensified through these recognition and facial recognition technologies themselves. There's an increasingly effort to kind of read our emotions through kind of reading our faces as well, which has all kinds of cultural biases, and we'll talk more about the kind of ways that emotions are important to these companies when we look at Spotify later in the course. Of course, what this means now is that there's a kind of ever-present mission creep. So someone may collect a bunch of facial recognition data for one reason and then sell it to another company, and then they'll use it for surveillance. So, these kind of things are increasingly enrolled in all kinds of security systems. And importantly, again, like the recognition here is often over-reported. There's a lot of inaccuracies and biases in terms of how these systems work. So again, this is kind of embedding these unequal and biased systems in terms of the way that we're kind of policed, surveilled, and disciplined. Um, Another excellent book on this is Discriminating Data, who talks about the new politics of recognition. Wendy Hugh Keong Chun. She's written a couple of quite amazing books about the kind of the new kind of data cultures that we're all living in. And importantly here, I think she asks some kind of key questions that as kind of citizens we should be asking and politicizing and kind of organizing for. As she says, do we really want these kind of tech bro billionaires responsible for our futures? They don't seem to kind of care about our futures too much and care much more about their own bottom lines and their own dreams of colonizing Mars or whatever. And again, we'll look at that later in the course as well. So she asks that kind of we need a kind of new kind of politics around this to expose and investigate how ignoring differences amplifies discrimination, both currently and historically. She wants us to think critically here to interrogate the default assumptions and axioms that form the basis for algorithms and data structures. Essentially, we need to kind of critique and have access to and understand how these machines are built and what they're doing. And part of that means we need to kind of, apprehend the past, present, and future of machine learning algorithms, why and how they're put into place, and what their predictions are doing, and whether they work and whether they're accurate or not. At the moment, most general citizens have no recourse to what happens to them after these machines make decisions about them. She wants us to kind of use existing AI systems to diagnose current inequalities and treat discriminatory predictions as evidence of past discrimination. And this is interesting. I'm not sure about this one. I mean, I think what she's asking there is kind of to use how these things are so bad now as kind of evidence to kind of create them better in the future. I think my politics would be more like, how about we just don't have these things in the future? But also wants us to draw from struggles and practices that are specific to kind of racial struggles in the US around desegregation and equality, to try and kind of challenge the increasing eugenic and segregationist defaults that are embedded in these networks. I think these are really important political questions that would be great to see more social movements build about. Obviously, at the moment, we have these huge multinational corporations that treat everything as kind of private, don't want to share any of this kind of stuff because it's seen, as secret, and this is how they're kind of making money. But like, we need a real political upheaval about this kind of stuff to be able to kind of address these issues. And the way the law protects these companies at the moment, I think, is something that really needs to be challenged. And so I think it's a good way to finish here is to point towards another incredible work, Algorithms of Oppression. Noble's work in particular is really important to the kind of research trajectories today, to think about how race is intensifies and transformed by these machines. And I'm kind of going to finish on this quote here about how we have to ask what is lost, who is harmed, and what should be forgotten with the embrace of artificial intelligence in decision making. It is no collective social benefit to organize information resources on the web through processes that solidify inequality and marginalization. And she kind of hopes that we would all, as a kind of citizenship and community, agree on that. Unfortunately, in the kind of current times, that doesn't seem to be the case. As things like racialization and eugenic thinking becomes increasingly normalized, and that's particularly happening in public sphere in the US at the moment. But I think what Noble here points out, and what Chun does in the previous slide, is really important for the basis of a new politics to kind of, address the many harms that are happening as the algorithmic AI data assemblage comes to dominate our lives more and more. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks.